Lawyers, has a case ever ruined your life? I was a nobody immigration lawyer in Seattle. My office was literally above a nail salon, and I mostly helped families fill out paperwork. Nothing glamorous. I made enough to pay rent and buy decent coffee. Then Noura walked in with her 2 kids clinging to her legs. She spoke broken English but handed me a thick folder. Inside were hospital records, newspaper clippings, and photos that made my stomach turn. This woman had survived bombing attacks in her home country. She had a jagged scar running down her forearm from shrapnel. Her asylum case had been denied. The court said her documents were fake. I stared at the paperwork, confused. These looked more real than half the stuff I'd seen approved. I took the case for free. Big mistake. Every motion I filed vanished from the court system. I'd submit paperwork on Monday, and by Friday they'd claim they never received it. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. When I showed up in person, the clerk would shrug and say the computer showed no record of my filings. I started making copies of everything, triple copies. I hand-delivered documents and took photos of myself handing them over. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the pattern. 12 other cases from Noura's region had been dismissed with identical language. Same phrases, same reasoning. All ruled on by Judge Patterson, who I'd never heard of before. I Googled him. Patterson was a major donor to Citizens for Border Security, a group pushing harsh immigration laws, the same group that had lobbied for the policies being used to deny these cases. I called a journalist friend named Kevin from college. He worked for the Seattle Times and had covered immigration before. Kevin was interested. We met at a coffee shop near Pike Place, and I showed him everything. He said he'd run the story within a week. 3 days later, Kevin's editor called me. Kevin had been reassigned to cover city council meetings. The immigration story was shelved indefinitely. Meanwhile, ICE showed up at Noura's apartment at 6 a.m. Her neighbor texted me while they were loading her and the kids into a van. I raced to the detention center, but they wouldn't let me see her. They said she was being processed for immediate removal. I filed an emergency stay. The court rejected it in 2 hours. Fastest response I'd ever seen from them. I drove to the airport calling every contact I had. Noura was supposed to be on a 3 p.m. flight to her home country. I got there at 2:30, running through security with my bar card held high. The flight had already left. At 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. But that's when things got weird. Noura's sister called me that night crying. She'd gotten a text from Noura saying goodbye, but the message came from a U.S. number, and the timestamp showed it was sent after the plane had supposedly taken off. I checked the flight manifest online. Noura's name was listed, but something was off. The destination code didn't match her home country. I looked up the airport code. It wasn't even a real airport. I called IC to report the error. They hung up on me. When I called back, they said no record of anyone named Noura existed in their system. I spent weeks calling refugee organizations in her home country. Nobody had seen her or the kids. It was like they'd vanished. That's when I realized what had happened. Noura and her children hadn't been deported. They'd been disappeared. I went public, posted everything online, held protests outside the courthouse, even got 15 minutes to speak at a city council meeting. I thought exposure would force someone to act. Instead, I became the target. My law license was suspended pending an ethics review for filing frivolous motions. My office was broken into twice. Someone spray-painted liar across my car windshield. My landlord terminated my lease with 30 days notice. No reason given, but his nephew worked for ICE. I moved into a motel that charged by the week, lived off ramen and whatever was left in my savings account. Applied for hundreds of legal jobs. Nobody would hire me, not even for document review work. 3 years later, I'm waiting tables at a diner on Aurora Avenue. I write blog posts under a fake name, trying to expose what happened to Noura. The posts get maybe 12 views each.